I didn't move into the building because something was wrong with it. I moved in because nothing was. That's what stood out first. The absence. The quiet that didn't feel temporary, like a pause between noises, but settled, as if it had been there long before I arrived and had no intention of leaving. The listing called it Ashwood Commons. The name meant nothing to me, and that felt appropriate. It sounded like something that had been renamed more than once, something that had learned not to keep an identity for too long. The photos were unremarkable. Beige walls, clean floors, no dramatic angles or design flourishes, just a place to exist. The rent was low, not suspiciously low, not the kind of number that makes you search for hidden mold or missing utilities, just low enough to feel like a small mercy, like something had gone right for once. I didn't question it. The building manager, Mrs. Halston, met me on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was overcast in that undecided way, not dark enough to rain, not bright enough to lift your mood. She was already waiting by the entrance when I arrived, keys looped neatly around her fingers. She was older than I expected, maybe late 60s or 70s, with white hair pulled back and hands that trembled just slightly when she moved. "You'll like it here," she said as we walked inside. Her voice was calm, practiced, not rehearsed exactly, but familiar with the words. She didn't say friendly, she didn't say welcoming, just peaceful. The lobby was clean and quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't echo. The walls absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. Even our footsteps seemed muted, softened by the space itself. As we climbed the stairs, I noticed there were no decorations, no framed notices or community boards, no noise complaints posted anywhere. Nothing demanded attention. My apartment was on the 4th floor. Mrs. Halston unlocked the door and stepped aside to let me look around. It was exactly what I expected. Clean, plain, hardwood floors dulled by age, a narrow kitchen along one wall, a bedroom just large enough for a bed and a dresser. The window didn't face the street, but opened toward the interior courtyard of the building instead. That struck me as odd for a moment. Then it didn't. Before she left, Mrs. Halston paused in the doorway. She hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "One thing," she said, her voice shifting slightly, not warmer, not colder, just different. "The bed, it's already placed correctly. We ask that you don't move it." I looked into the bedroom. The bed was pushed flush against the interior wall, the wall opposite the window. It was positioned neatly, precisely, like someone had measured the distance more than once. "Why?" I asked. "Building policy," she said without missing a beat. "It helps people sleep better." That sounded harmless enough. I signed the lease without reading it carefully. I remember thinking I would look it over later. I never did. That first night, I lay in bed and stared at the wall. The paint was off-white, faintly textured, marked with small imperfections you only notice when you look at something for too long. Tiny bumps, a slight unevenness, nothing unusual, just a wall. I remember feeling oddly comfortable facing it, like my body had already decided how it wanted to rest before my mind caught up. I slept deeply. There were no dreams that I could remember, no half-formed images, no fragments clinging to me when I woke. Just a heavy, steady rest, the kind that feels like sinking into something warm and endless. When morning came, it didn't feel abrupt. I surfaced gently, without the usual resistance. I didn't feel refreshed. I felt smooth, as if something inside me had been quietly quieted. Over the next few days, I began to notice how little noise there was in the building. No arguments through the walls, no televisions murmuring late at night, no footsteps pacing overhead. The hallways always smelled faintly of detergent and dust, like nothing had happened there recently, like nothing ever happened. I started recognizing the other residents in passing. Marcus lived down the hall. He worked from home and always looked tired, but not in an unhealthy way, more like someone who slept deeply but never quite finished resting. Emily lived one floor below me with her daughter, Ava. The girl was quiet, observant, the kind of child who watched more than she spoke. There was an older couple who nodded politely whenever I passed them, and a man who came home late at night and left early in the morning. Everyone was polite. Everyone was quiet. Everyone looked like they slept very well. At the time, I thought I had gotten lucky. I didn't realize yet that quiet, when it's shared by everyone, is rarely an accident, and I hadn't yet learned that comfort, when it comes too easily, usually expects something in return. It was Ava who said it first. I ran into her and her mother in the lobby one morning, just as I was leaving for work. Emily was distracted, digging through her bag for something, keys maybe, or her phone. Ava stood slightly apart, her small hands folded in front of her, watching the elevator doors like they might say something to her if she waited long enough. She looked up at me when I stepped closer. "Do you sleep facing the wall?" she asked. Her voice was calm, not playful, not curious in the way children usually are. It sounded like she was checking a detail, confirming something. Emily froze. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, placing her hand on Ava's shoulder. Her fingers tightened just a little. "She's been asking strange questions lately." Ava didn't look embarrassed. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. "Everyone faces the wall," she said, matter of fact, certain, as if she were stating a rule I'd simply forgotten. I thought about it on the walk to work, about the way my bed was positioned, about how natural it felt to face the wall that first night. I told myself it was coincidence, uniform layouts, building policy, the kind of thing you don't notice until someone points it out. That night, I paid attention. When I lay down, I noticed how easily my body settled when I turned toward the wall. My breathing slowed almost immediately. My thoughts softened, like they were losing their edges. The day seemed to slide away faster than usual, details dissolving before I could hold on to them. Out of curiosity, I turned toward the window. Sleep didn't come. It wasn't fear. There was no jolt of panic, no sense that something was wrong. It was subtler than that. A quiet resistance, like trying to rest in the wrong position, or wearing shoes that don't quite fit. My thoughts kept starting and stopping, never finishing themselves. Minutes stretched longer than they should, thinning out until time felt strangely loose. I lay there longer than I realized, staring at the faint outline of the window, waiting for my mind to let go. It didn't. Eventually, without thinking much about it, I turned back toward the wall. Sleep arrived almost immediately. The difference was so stark that I noticed it as I drifted off, the way a switch flips, the way something clicks into place when it's finally aligned. After that, I began to notice patterns. Not at once. They came slowly, the way habits reveal themselves only after you've already adopted them. Beds pressed closer to walls in neighboring apartments,
furniture arranged so that facing any other direction would be inconvenient, curtains that were rarely opened all the way, even during the day. Late at night, when I walked past the courtyard or glanced across it from my window, I could see into other bedrooms. Every visible sleeper was turned the same way, facing inward, facing the wall.
At first, I laughed it off. Coincidence has a way of looking deliberate when you start searching for it. I told myself I was projecting meaning onto something mundane. People like consistency. People copy each other without realizing it. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. I stopped looking for them. But the idea lingered. After a while, the way I slept stopped feeling like a choice. It became automatic, the same way you stop thinking about which side of the road to walk on or which way a light switch moves. My body turned toward the wall before I was fully aware of lying down. On the nights I tried to resist, the result was always the same. Sleep wouldn't come. Not dramatically, not painfully, just not at all. My mind stayed half-active, looping through unfinished thoughts, old worries that no longer felt relevant but refused to disappear. I would lie there for hours, exhausted, staring into the dark, feeling like I was missing something essential. By morning, I would be hollowed out, tired in a way that didn't improve with coffee or rest. My body functioned, but my thoughts felt thin, stretched too far. And then, inevitably, the next night, I would face the wall again. The relief was immediate. Sleep came smoothly, without dreams, without interruption, deep and soundless, like being lowered gently into still water. When I woke, the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a calm that felt earned, deserved. That's when comfort started to feel conditional. I noticed it in the others, too, once I started paying attention. Marcus mentioned casually that he hadn't had insomnia since moving in. He said it with the faint surprise of someone who'd accepted a miracle without asking how it worked. Emily looked calmer every week. Ava stopped asking questions altogether. The dark circles under Emily's eyes faded, but so did something else, a kind of alertness. She smiled more, but she spoke less. The older couple stopped coming down to collect their mail. Eventually, it just appeared outside their door, neatly stacked, untouched. No one seemed concerned. It was as if the building had quietly agreed on some rules, and everyone had learned them without being taught. Sleep facing the wall. Don't ask questions. Rest comes easier that way. I might have continued accepting it if nothing else had happened, if the pattern had stayed gentle, unobtrusive, if it had only ever offered comfort. But one evening, as I was unlocking my door, I heard raised voices in the hallway below. Not angry, frightened. And for the first time since moving in, the quiet felt like it was listening. After that, sleep stopped feeling like something I chose. It became something the building decided for me. The change was subtle, quiet enough that I didn't notice it happening, only that it had already happened by the time I thought to question it. My body learned the routine faster than my mind did. I would undress, turn off the light, lie down, and without any conscious decision, I would already be facing the wall. The position felt correct in a way that bypassed thought entirely. On the nights I tried to sleep any other way, the resistance returned. It wasn't pain, it wasn't fear, it was pressure. Not physical exactly, more like a mental weight pressing inward. My thoughts refused to settle. They didn't race or spiral, they simply hovered, unfinished, like sentences that never reached a period. I would drift toward sleep and then stall, suspended just above it, unable to fall through. Time stretched in strange ways during those nights.
Minutes felt long, hours felt thin. I checked the clock less and less because it stopped meaning anything. When morning came, it arrived without relief. I would wake exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, my body heavy, my head dull, my patience worn down to something fragile. By contrast, the nights I complied felt effortless. I would turn toward the wall and feel the pressure lift immediately. My breathing slowed, my thoughts loosened their grip. Sleep didn't creep in, it arrived all at once, clean and soundless. No dreams, no half-waking, just absence. The difference became impossible to ignore. Comfort, I realized, was no longer a side effect. It was a condition. I started noticing the ways the building encouraged it. Furniture in the hallways seemed subtly arranged to guide movement inward. Corners softened, sight lines shortened. Even during the day, the light in my apartment felt gentler when I stood closer to the wall. Brighter near the window, yes, but harsher too, like it belonged to somewhere else. My bed shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough that one morning I noticed the gap between the headboard and the wall was gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember when I'd pushed it back. I couldn't.
When I asked myself whether it mattered, the question felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The others changed too, though more gradually. Marcus stopped mentioning work deadlines. He still worked, still logged hours, but he spoke about it like it was something happening in the background, not something that demanded his attention. Emily's voice grew softer over time. Her sentences shortened. Ava stayed close to her now, quiet and compliant, no longer asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. One afternoon, I noticed the older couple's door had been left slightly ajar. Their mail was stacked neatly on the floor inside. The television was on, volume low. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and something else I couldn't place. I stood there longer than I meant to, waiting for movement that never came. I told myself they were asleep. That explanation settled easily. The first real disruption came on a Thursday evening. I was in my apartment when I heard voices echoing up the stairwell, raised, sharp against the building's usual hush. I recognized Mrs. Houston's voice immediately, not louder than usual, but firmer. The other voice belonged to a man I'd seen once or twice, but never spoken to. "I can't sleep," he said, his voice cracked slightly. "Something's wrong here." I stepped into the hallway without thinking. Others had done the same. Doors stood open just enough for people to listen without being seen. Mrs. Houston spoke calmly. "It takes time to adjust." "I don't want to adjust," he said, his voice cracked slightly. "I don't feel like myself." There was a pause. "That feeling passes," she replied. The man laughed, short and hollow. "That's what scares me." I didn't see him after that night. His apartment lights still turned on in the evenings, still went dark in the mornings. From my window, I could see the shape of a body on the bed when the curtains were parted just enough, facing the wall. No one mentioned him, not by name, not even indirectly. The building absorbed his absence the way it absorbed sound, smoothing it over until it left no trace. That's when I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. The building didn't punish resistance. It exhausted it. It didn't force you to comply.
It made compliance the only path to rest, to clarity, to relief. I tried one last time to stay awake deliberately, to face the window and hold my ground. I lay there with my eyes open, breathing slowly, telling myself that sleep was just biology, that walls were just walls. The pressure returned, heavier than before. Not painful, insistent, as if something was waiting patiently for me to stop being difficult. When I finally turned back toward the wall, the relief was immediate and overwhelming. My body sank into the mattress. My thoughts let go. I felt a deep, unmistakable sense of correctness settle over me, like I had finally stopped making a mistake. As sleep took me, one thought surfaced clearly before dissolving. This place doesn't need obedience. It only needs time, and it has plenty of that. When I woke the next morning, I felt rested, calm, and more alone than I had ever been, because somewhere in the building, someone had finished adjusting, and no one else seemed to notice at all. The building never acknowledged that he was gone. That was what unsettled me most, not the disappearance itself, but the way it was absorbed, like a sound swallowed by thick fabric. His name wasn't spoken. His door stayed closed. The routine continued without interruption. I tried to remember which apartment he lived in. I couldn't. I knew I had seen him. I remembered his voice, the way it cracked when he said he didn't feel like himself anymore. But when I walked the hallways, every door looked equally ordinary. Every light followed the same quiet rhythm. Nothing marked absence here. Nothing ever seemed to. That's when I started paying attention to the idea of leaving. Not in a dramatic way, not with panic or urgency, just as a possibility, a thing people did when places stopped fitting. I told myself I would think about it later, when I had time, when I wasn't tired. Later never came. Whenever the thought surfaced, it slid away before I could hold it. I would imagine packing a bag, and the image would blur. I would picture myself handing in notice, and the scene would lose its details, like a dream you try to remember after waking. The idea didn't frighten me. It felt irrelevant. That was the most alarming part, the absence of fear, the absence of urgency. The building didn't make staying feel necessary. It made leaving feel unnecessary. I started noticing how rarely anyone talked about the future. Conversations stayed small and contained. Weather, schedules, groceries. No one mentioned plans more than a week out. No one talked about moving or changing jobs or wanting something different. Desire itself seemed to thin out here, stretched so evenly that nothing stood out.
I ran into Marcus one evening near the mailboxes. He was holding a small stack of envelopes, flipping through them without much interest. I asked him before I could stop myself, "Ever think about leaving?" He looked up slowly, like he'd been woken from a light sleep. "Leaving," he repeated. "Moving somewhere else." He considered this longer than I expected, not with concern, with confusion. He said finally, I don't see why." That was all. He didn't sound defensive. He didn't sound afraid. He sounded like someone being asked a question that didn't apply to him. The building felt heavier after that. Not physically, emotionally, like a pressure settling in places I hadn't known were empty. I began to notice how the hallway subtly curved inward, guiding movement towards the center of the structure without ever appearing to do so. How doors were placed just off alignment, encouraging you to turn one way instead of another. Even the staircases seemed designed to bring you back inside yourself. One afternoon, I tried to map the floor in my head as I walked, counting steps, measuring distances with my stride. The numbers didn't quite add up. A few feet missing here, a few extra there. Nothing dramatic enough to prove anything, but enough to leave a residue of doubt. That night, I dreamed for the first time since moving in. It wasn't a dream in the usual sense. No images, no story. Just the sensation of standing somewhere familiar and realizing I had been there for a very long time without noticing. When I woke, the feeling lingered, heavy and uncomfortable, like a thought that didn't belong to me. I didn't turn toward the wall immediately. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting the feeling settle. The pressure came back slowly this time, not all at once. A gentle insistence, a reminder. I gave in. Sleep took me instantly. The next morning, there was a notice taped near the mailboxes. Routine maintenance, it read. Structural inspection. No action required from residents. The language was careful, reassuring, vague. I stared at it longer than necessary, reading the words over and over until they lost their meaning. Something about the phrase structural inspection lodged itself in my mind, the implication that there was something to inspect, something hidden beneath the calm surface. That evening, I knocked on Mrs. Houston's door. It was the first time I'd tried. She answered after a moment, already dressed for the night, a soft robe, slippers. Her expression was calm, unsurprised, as if she'd been expecting me. "Yes," she said. "I wanted to ask about the building." She stepped aside to let me in without comment. Her apartment was nearly identical to mine, but quieter somehow, less personal. The furniture was arranged neatly, precisely, as if it had been placed once and never touched again. Her bed was visible through the open bedroom door. It was pressed flush against the wall. People don't really leave, do they? She considered this. People leave all the time, she said gently. They give notice, they pack their things, they walk out the front door. But they come back, I said. Sometimes, she agreed. Sometimes they don't need to. I swallowed. And the ones who don't? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. They finish adjusting, she said quietly. That's all. I felt a chill move through me, slow and deliberate. What happens when they finish? I asked. Her gaze shifted just briefly towards the interior wall of her apartment. You're asking the wrong question, she said quietly. I waited. What you should be asking is why it's easier not to. The words settled over me, heavy and undeniable. I understood then that the building didn't need to trap anyone. It didn't need locks or threats or force. It offered something better. Relief. And it made sure that everything else, fear, doubt, resistance, felt like unnecessary effort. As I left her apartment and walked back down the hallway, I became aware of something else. A faint sensation of being guided. Not pulled, not pushed, aligned. As if every step I took was being gently corrected,
nudged toward a center I hadn't yet seen. That night, I woke up standing in the hallway, barefoot. Facing the wall no apartment touched, and for the first time, I realized the building wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. I don't remember leaving my apartment. I remember lying down. I remember the wall in front of me, pale and unremarkable in the low light. I remember the easing of pressure as my body settled into sleep. And then I was standing in the hallway, barefoot. The floor was cool beneath my feet, not cold, just present enough to register. The lights were dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting long, softened shadows that made the space feel narrower than it was during the day. Every door was closed, every apartment silent, except for the wall. It stood at the center of the floor, exactly where no apartment reached. I had passed it dozens of times without thinking about it, a stretch of plain surface where nothing should be. The wall that didn't belong to anyone. All the bedroom walls pointed towards it. I hadn't realized that before, not consciously, but standing there, facing it, the alignment became impossible to ignore, like spokes meeting at a hub, like the building had been designed with this one point in mind, everything else arranged around it with quiet intention. Mrs. Houston stood beside me. She was wearing a nightgown, her white hair loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller than she did during the day, more fragile somehow, but also more certain, as if this version of her was closer to the truth than the one who collected rent and repeated familiar assurances. "You're adjusting," she said softly. My mouth felt dry. "I don't remember coming out here." She nodded. "Most people don't." I looked back at the wall. Up close, it was identical to every other wall in the building. Same off-white paint, same faint texture, no seams, no markings, just a flat surface where nothing should be. "What's behind it?" I asked. She didn't answer right away.
For a moment, we stood there in silence. The building felt different at this hour. Less like a place people lived, more like a single held breath. I became aware of how still everything was. No distant traffic, no pipes knocking, no hum of electricity. Nothing moved. Finally, Mrs. Houston spoke. Something that can't move, something that doesn't need to. I felt a quiet chill settle into my chest. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. "If it can't move," I said slowly, "why does it matter where we sleep?" Her lips pressed briefly, as if she were choosing words she had used many times before. "It reaches differently, not through space, through state." I frowned. "State?" "Sleep," she clarified. "The mind when it stops resisting itself. That's where it has access." The words felt careful, deliberately incomplete. "It feeds," she continued before I could ask another question. "Not on dreams, not on fear. Those are too sharp, too unstable. It feeds on the part of you that stays aware even when you think you're resting." I thought of the pressure, the resistance when I faced away from the wall, the instant relief when I turned back. "You're saying it feeds on sleep," I said. She shook her head slightly. "Not sleep itself, awareness without direction, attention without intention." I didn't fully understand, but something in me already accepted it. The way you accept an explanation that fits too neatly to argue with. "What happens to people?" I asked. "The ones who disappear." "They don't disappear," she said gently. They empty. The word landed with more weight than it should have. When someone fully adapts, there's nothing left that resists. No curiosity, no friction. They still wake up, they still move through the day, but the part of them that needed anything else is gone. I thought of the older couple, of Marcus's distant calm, of Emily's softened voice, of Ava's silence. And when that happens, I asked. Her gaze didn't leave the wall. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something like apology in her expression. "Sleepers," she said. The word echoed in my head, hollow and vast. I wanted to step back. I wanted to turn away, but my feet didn't move. Standing there felt right in a way that bypassed fear entirely, like my body recognized the place, even if my mind was still catching up. "Why build apartments around it?" I asked quietly. She exhaled, slow and steady. "Containment, stability. This thing has always existed, long before the building, long before the city. They learned early that if enough minds were aligned, enough rest provided, it would remain calm. And if not?" I asked. Her silence was answer enough. I felt it then. Not a sound, not a vibration, just a pressure, faint but unmistakable, pressing back from the other side of the wall. Vast, patient, old in a way that had nothing to do with time. It wasn't reaching for me. It didn't need to. It knew where I would be when sleep came. My knees weakened slightly, not with fear, but with understanding. The realization slid into place smoothly, without resistance. The realization slid into place smoothly, without resistance. This building wasn't a shelter. It was a system. I don't remember walking back to my apartment. I remember lying down. I remember the wall filling my vision. I remember thinking, distantly, that I should be afraid. Instead, I felt calm. As sleep took me, the pressure remained, steady and attentive, like something counting on me to do exactly what I was already doing. And somewhere in the building, a balance shifted. When I woke the next morning, time felt thinner than it had the day before, and I had the quiet, unsettling sense that whatever lived behind that wall now knew me well enough to wait. After that night, time stopped leaving marks. Days still passed. I still went to work. I still ate meals, answered emails, nodded at people in hallways. From the outside, nothing about my life appeared broken. If anything, it looked smoother, more efficient. I arrived on time. I left on time. I slept better than I ever had. But when I tried to remember individual days, they slid together. Not in a blur, more like layers of thin fabric laid one on top of another until no single one stood out. I knew Monday had happened. I knew Tuesday had followed, but there were no edges between them, no texture, nothing to catch on. I stopped checking the calendar. Not deliberately. I simply forgot it was there. When I did look, the date felt theoretical, like a fact I had been told, rather than something I was living inside. Weeks passed that way, maybe longer. It was hard to tell. Sleep, however, remained perfect. I would lie down, face the wall, and vanish. There was no sensation of drifting, no hypogonic images, no moment where thought turned into dream. One instant I was aware of the wall's pale surface in front of me, and the next I was waking up, morning already in progress. No residue, no aftertaste,
At first, I thought this was healing. The anxiety I'd carried for years was gone. The low-level noise that used to fill my head, unfinished conversations, imagined futures, remembered mistakes, had faded into something manageable, then into nothing at all. I felt calmer, more stable, less reactive. People commented on it. "You seem rested," a coworker said one afternoon. "What's your secret?" I smiled and didn't answer. I couldn't have explained it anyway. But as the sharp edges of my thoughts softened, other things dulled too. Music stopped reaching me the way it used to. I still put it on out of habit, letting familiar songs play while I cooked or cleaned, but they felt flat, like copies of something I once enjoyed. Books became harder to follow. I would reread the same paragraph several times and still not retain it. The words slid off, refusing to lodge anywhere meaningful. Conversations required effort, not because they were difficult, but because I struggled to care where they were going. I responded automatically, choosing appropriate expressions, appropriate reactions, without feeling the pull to contribute anything more than necessary. When people asked me about myself, I answered smoothly. Where I worked, how long I'd lived there, what I liked to do in my free time. The answers sounded correct, familiar, but distant, like reading from a file that had been prepared for me. One evening, standing in the kitchen, I tried to remember the last time I'd felt restless before moving into the building. Not the fact of it. I remembered that I used to complain about insomnia, that I used to lie awake at night turning things over in my head. But when I tried to recall a specific night, a ceiling I stared at, a thought that kept repeating, there was nothing there. The memory itself was missing. It felt like reaching for a word that never arrives. The shape of it was there, but not the substance. That was when I noticed the bed. It was closer to the wall than it had been before. I was sure of it. I stood there for a long time, staring at the headboard. There was no gap now, no space to slide a hand between wood and paint. It was pressed flush, as if it had always belonged there, as if the wall had been waiting for it. On the opposite wall, something caught the light at the right angle. Thin lines, uneven, faint, scratch marks. They were old, or they looked old. It was hard to tell. They didn't feel recent, but they didn't feel unfamiliar either. I stepped closer, tracing them with my eyes, following the direction of the grooves. They ran horizontally, low, at the height of a bed. My chest tightened slightly. I didn't remember making them. I also didn't remember not making them. The uncertainty was heavier than fear. Fear would have given me something to react to. This felt quieter, more settled, like evidence from a version of myself I no longer had access to. I tried that night to imagine leaving again, not emotionally, logically, packing a bag, folding clothes, choosing what to take and what to leave. The images formed briefly, then dissolved. The idea of walking out the front door felt abstract, like imagining stepping into a photograph. Technically possible, emotionally meaningless. Mrs. Halston was right. People could leave. Nothing physically stopped them. But the building didn't need to. It had already taken the part of me that would have wanted to. That realization should have frightened me. Instead, it landed gently, like an explanation that fit.
When I lay down and faced the wall, the familiar pressure returned. Not stronger than before, closer, more attentive. It didn't feel invasive. It didn't feel urgent. It felt like presence, like something waiting calmly for me to finish settling into the role I'd been practicing. I slept deeply, and somewhere in the building, someone else finished adjusting. I didn't know who. I didn't hear anything. I just knew. The way you know when a room loses one of its occupants, not by sound, but by the way the air rearranges itself. When I woke the next morning, I felt calm, perfectly calm. And that, more than anything else that had happened so far, finally scared me, because the feeling passed almost as soon as I noticed it, leaving behind only acceptance. Later that day, as I stood by the mailboxes, I noticed a new piece of paper taped to the wall. Another notice. Routine maintenance. Structural review. No action required from residents. I read it twice, then a third time, the words settling into place with uncomfortable ease. For the first time, I wondered whether the building wasn't changing us at all, whether it was simply revealing what had been built into it from the beginning, and whether this had ever been meant to end with just one building. I didn't discover the others all at once.
There was no single document, no hidden archive that suddenly explained everything. The understanding arrived the same way everything else had in this building, slowly, without resistance, settling in places that no longer pushed back. It started with a name. The maintenance notice by the mailboxes listed a company I didn't recognize, but the words felt familiar in a way that bothered me. I stood there longer than necessary, reading it again and again, trying to remember where I'd seen it before. I couldn't. But later that week, walking home from work, I passed a construction site a few blocks away. Temporary fencing, piles of concrete panels stacked neatly, a sign posted at the entrance with the same company name printed across the top. Residential development, quiet living, limited availability. I stopped walking. The rendering on the sign felt uncomfortably familiar. Clean lines, neutral colors, an inward-facing courtyard that served no obvious purpose. Windows arranged in a way that suggested symmetry more than necessity. I stood there for a long time, watching workers move slowly across the site, their motions unhurried, almost methodical. None of them looked up. That night, sleep didn't come immediately. Not because of fear. Fear still felt distant, theoretical, but something felt unfinished, like a thought that had reached the edge of itself and paused, waiting to be allowed through. I lay facing the wall and let my mind drift where it wanted to go. It moved outward, beyond the building, beyond the block, beyond the city. The idea formed gently, without force, like a conclusion I'd been circling for a long time without realizing it. Ashwood Commons wasn't unique. It was a template. Once I allowed myself to see that, the patterns became obvious. I noticed them everywhere. Older apartment buildings with strange interior layouts, courtyards that didn't quite make sense, hallways that curved inward instead of running straight, service shafts marked on outdated plans and quietly removed from newer ones. Different cities, different decades, same design. Each one built around a space that wasn't meant to be accessed. Each one filled slowly, patiently, with people who slept deeply and asked fewer questions over time. The buildings didn't need to force us. They just needed to offer relief.
we volunteered. Not consciously, not formally, but each night millions of people lay down and gave something away in exchange for rest they didn't have to earn. Awareness without direction, attention without intention, the softest parts of ourselves, surrendered so gently we never noticed when they were gone. I passed Mrs. Houston in the hallway one evening not long after that realization settled. She looked smaller now, or maybe I was seeing her more clearly. Her steps were careful, her posture precise, as if she had learned exactly how much of herself needed to remain present. "They've approved another one," she said, stopping beside me. "Another what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Another building," she said. "Different city, same design." She said it the way someone might mention the weather, as a fact that required no reaction. I nodded. That felt like the correct response. That night, as I lay facing the wall, I noticed the pressure was lighter than it had been before. Not gone, just eased, like something on the other side had settled more comfortably into itself. Satisfied. Somewhere, enough sleepers had aligned. Somewhere, a wall was full. The idea drifted through my mind without resistance, without urgency. It felt distant, abstract, like thinking about tides in an ocean you never see. I understood then that the system didn't require all of us forever. Once a building was full, once it reached equilibrium, it could wait. Years, decades, longer. The next one was already underway somewhere else. Another quiet block, another inward-facing courtyard, another sealed space that didn't appear on the plans. Humanity didn't live near these things. Humanity existed to keep them asleep. That thought didn't frighten me. What frightened me, briefly, faintly, was how reasonable it sounded, how neatly it explained the world. As I drifted to sleep, I became aware of a new sensation, subtle but unmistakable, a sense of nearing completion. Not mine, the building's, and with it, the quiet understanding that when something reaches its limit, when it is finally full and calm and satisfied, it doesn't end. It simply stops needing you. When I woke the next morning, the air in the hallway felt different, quieter, as if the building was holding its breath, not in anticipation, but in rest. And I realized, without knowing how, that we were close now, very close. Whatever came next wouldn't arrive with noise or warning. It would arrive the same way everything else here did, softly. The last thing I lost was fear. Not all at once, not in a way I could point to or mark on a calendar. It simply stopped arriving when it was supposed to. Thoughts that should have unsettled me passed through without resistance, like stones sinking into deep water. I noticed it one night when I woke up and realized the building was almost full. I didn't know how I knew. There was no announcement, no visible change, no final tenant arriving with boxes and apologies. Just a sense of completion settling over the place, the way you can feel when a room finally quiets after everyone has gone to sleep. The pressure behind the wall was gentler now, diffuse, rested, satisfied. I lay there, facing the wall, and tried one last time to remember who I had been before I moved in. Not facts, not surface details. Those were easy enough to retrieve, lined up neatly in my mind like labels on a file. I tried to remember what it felt like to want something strongly, to lie awake because my thoughts wouldn't slow down, to resist sleep because it meant giving up control, even briefly. Those memories didn't come. What did come was the understanding that I had already given them away night by night without noticing when the final piece left. There wasn't a single moment where I crossed a line, just a gradual thinning, a smoothing out, until there was nothing left that pushed back. The scratch marks on the far wall no longer bothered me. They felt distant, belonging to someone else, someone earlier, someone unfinished. I understood then why no one panicked when they realized. Panic requires friction, resistance, a self that pushes against what's happening. By the time the truth becomes clear, there's nothing left that wants to push. Mrs. Halston stopped appearing not long after that. Or maybe she didn't. It's hard to say. Her apartment remained occupied. The lights still followed a routine. Someone slept there every night, the same way they always had, facing the wall. A new tenant moved into 3W. I passed them in the hallway once. They looked tired, hopeful, relieved to have found a place that felt quiet, affordable, peaceful. I thought about warning them. The idea formed, hovered for a moment, and then passed. Not because I was afraid, not because I was forbidden. It simply felt unnecessary. They would sleep better soon. That was enough. On my last clear night, if it was a night at all, I realized something else. The building didn't need all of us forever. Once full, once calm, it could wait. Decades, maybe longer. The next one was already underway somewhere else. Another quiet block, another inward-facing courtyard, another sealed space that didn't appear on the plans. Humanity didn't live near these things. Humanity existed to keep them asleep. I turned slightly in bed, settling more comfortably against the wall. The paint felt cool through the sheet, familiar, correct. Sleep came instantly. No dreams, no thoughts, just rest. And somewhere far away, in another city, someone signed a lease without reading it too closely. The building was peaceful, affordable, quiet, ready. Sleep doesn't end the way people imagine it does. It doesn't close like a door or fade like a light. It simply becomes deeper, quieter, until there's no clear line between resting and being held. I don't wake up the way I used to anymore. There's no sharp return, no moment of realization, just a gradual awareness that I am here, that the wall is still in front of me, that everything is exactly as it should be. Sometimes in that soft space between nothing and something, I feel the building breathing, not with air, with alignment. Every room settled, every sleeper turned the correct way, a structure doing what it was designed to do, efficiently and without strain. The wall no longer presses back. It doesn't need to. It is full. When the thing behind it sleeps, the building sleeps with it. And when the building sleeps, the city above barely notices. Traffic flows, lights change, people complain about being tired without knowing why. Elsewhere, another place is waking up. A new building rises quietly, no ceremony, no explanation, just concrete, drywall, and a shape at the center no one thinks to question. The listings describe it the same way they always do. Quiet, affordable, peaceful. The first tenants move in carrying boxes and expectations. They comment on how well they sleep their first night, how heavy and complete it feels, how they don't remember dreaming. They push their beds against the wall because it feels right. They don't ask why. They never do. If you're listening now, lying in bed, eyes closed, feeling the pull of sleep, that's okay. You don't need to stay awake. You don't need to understand. The wall will still be there when you wake up. And if it isn't, then it only means you're somewhere new, somewhere quiet, somewhere peaceful.